Islands of Nine isn't a particularly new game. It's been in development since 2015, and to be fair to it, back then there wasn't as many BR games popping up left, right and centre. These days it does feel as though a new BR game arrives every 2 weeks, and we already know that some of the big AAA developers are adding VR modes to their games, including Call of Duty, Battlefield and possibly The Division. What those games don't have though, that possibly Islands of Nine does, is the flexibility of not being shackled with reality. Now when you look at Fortnite or Realm Royale, they have a fun take on the genre because, well, they're made to be a little bit mad and kooky in places. They can be that way because they're not a serious tactical shooter like PUBG is, and PUBG is firmly placed in reality. And as soon as you start playing Islands of Nine, you will realise that this is most definitely a sci-fi game. The action takes place inside an alien dome that was built by a near extinct race of time-travelling aliens called the Nine. And inside the dome are items stolen from various Earth eras, and of course the aliens go ahead and abduct humans and force them to fight in their arena for their own amusement. How kind of them. What's different about the landscape of Islands of Nine though is that the map has a lot of different areas and zones, I suppose. So you've got pirate ships, medieval castles, Roman colosseums, even future settings too, all blended together on one map. It's a bit mad really, a weird mismatch of art design that doesn't have any cohesion whatsoever, and for me it comes across a bit odd. But then the developers might say, well, because of the concept and story of the game, they're allowed to get away with it. But in all honesty, most players don't really care about the backstory of a battle royale game. They just care if it's fun, and I think that Islands of Nine is okay. In fact, I'd argue that most players won't even know the backstory or care to even learn it. They just want to know if the gunplay is good, and if it is, they'll play it. Now this game was originally a Kickstarter game, and it's being made and published by indie developer Define Human. The studio had people who've worked on previous big titles at Ubisoft and Epic Games, so there's clearly a lot of talent there. And I understand that the founders are big CSGO and Halo fans, and so this style of game, a competitive FPS, is something that's quite close to their hearts. What's the overall gameplay like then? Well, when you're playing Islands of Nine, what you can expect is a very fast-paced game. Your movement is extremely quick, and don't worry about fall damage because there is none. Hopefully that's pretty noticeable from the slam superhero landing that you do when you fall into the map at the beginning. Also, don't expect to see players just running around. When I played, I noticed a jump meta of players jumping around quite a lot to avoid being hit. And when you load into a game, you'll notice that in this game you can get pretty much anywhere on the map. If you're playing something like PUBG, I think that you're reasonably limited where you parachute depending on the trajectory of the plane. Fortnite a little bit less so, but even still, there are places that you might not be able to reach, or you'd take a very long time getting there. There isn't a plane or a ship though in Islands of Nine, which I guess makes sense with it being in the future. Instead, you just drop in from a random point, and a few seconds later, the safe zone is already marked. This means that you do have a bit of choice as to where to go before you hit the ground, with the knowledge of where the safe zone is going to be. When it comes to weaponry, well, that's reasonably standard. You've got mostly military weapons like shotguns, semi-auto rifles, fully auto rifles, pistols, snipers, the usual, but every weapon uses bullets that contain something called bright powder. All that really means is that when you fire off your weapon, it leaves a tracer. The further you are away, the less apparent the tracer will be. Expect to see laser trails everywhere, lighting up that alien dome. Weapons have learnable recoil patterns as well, so there's definitely some skill required here to master the game. In fact, because of the love for games like Halo and CSGO, it does feel like there's an esports angle here maybe, or at least a desire for the game to be esports orientated in the future. Will it ever get there though? I'm not so sure. But Nvidia did do an interview with the project lead on the game called Rob Logan, and he was asked about the possibility of esports and how a BR game which is inherently random with loot and other things could be a potential esport. And he mentioned that learnable recoil, of course, but also the fact that the loot table in the game is very generous. And what that translates to is that when you play, it doesn't really take that much to find a weapon that you can at least defend yourself with, which is important. And they do plan to add a full-blown ELO ranking system, much like in League of Legends. The idea would be that you'd have a rank from, say, bronze to diamond and work your way up through the system. And in theory, you will always get games with people roughly around your skill level. But that would of course depend on the amount of players playing the game and those searching for a game at that specific moment. When it comes to armor, Islands of Nine does things a bit differently. Previously we mentioned that the map is broken down into different areas: medieval, futuristic, it's kind of like the Crystal Maze. Well, this blends into the armor too. The core armor you can pick up is broken down into 5 main parts: head, chest, legs, arms, and then 1 general shield. This is of course a lot more than with something like PUBG that just offers up 2. The biggest difference here though is not the amount of armor pieces at all, but with this game you can find a helmet for instance that has different perks on it. A medieval helmet may offer up more armor protection against gunfire, whereas a futuristic helmet might give you extra HUD options like a compass, for example, directing you to safety. When you find a helmet in PUBG, you always tend to go for the highest one that you can find. Level 1 does an okay job until you can find level 2, and then a level 3 is the ideal choice if you can find an airdrop. There isn't really a choice in Islands of Nine, it's just a requirement. So it's interesting to see in Islands of Nine the element of choice with your armour as to what perk you want, of a better term, as well as the added protection. This is of course something that they could have for all pieces of armour, but they've been careful to not overdo it and make it too complicated. So as far as I'm aware, it's only on the helmet. It's also important for an enemy to be able to identify certain pieces on enemy players and know what they do. Visually, the graphics, I think the game looks okay, but it is running on Unreal Engine 4, as is everything else, and I think for the most part any game on that engine will look okay when it comes to lighting at the very least. A lot of indie Unreal Engine games tend to look very similar though. The style of the game, yeah, it's pretty unique and the environments are kind of interesting. There are definitely parts of the level though that look way more impressive than others. In fact, some parts of the map don't look good at all, but for the most part it does okay. That being said, this is of course a much smaller indie team, so I think it's commendable what they've been able to accomplish, but as I mentioned, this game has been in development since 2015. The UI heads-up display, relatively clean, but I still think that it needs some work. The weapon attachment system is very Crysis, and if you've played Crysis before, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's a pop-up gun with live attachments, adding and removing them. It's a tidy system though that does the job. One thing that you definitely will notice in Islands of Nine compared to other BR games is how fast the zone moves. And it feels like the action is pushed along at a very fast pace. And it gets to the end reasonably quicker than other BR games. And part of this is down to the player count. The games start at 50 players and often the player count is already down to around 30 to 20 without barely any time going by. And this is good and bad, I suppose. Good because games are much faster, but I feel like there may be a bigger reason for this player count. I could be wrong, but I think earlier on in the game's life, the games were 100 players. I'm not sure if that got reduced because of balance or because of a lack of players in general, hopefully not the latter. The game has just released though into early access, and it's had around 1,000 players playing in the last 24 hours. Not really that much, but I think that this game's success will be determined by how many players they can keep and how regularly they can update the game. Right now you can play the game on Steam Early Access for around £20. That seems quite expensive for what it is. Is it worth it? Is it the next big BR game? Well, I don't think so. The core part of the game is fun, the mechanics work well, the gunplay is okay, and most importantly the netcode, I know that I use that term a lot, it seems pretty solid. I can't say I noticed a big amount of lag or anything like that during my playtime, which was good to see. That being said, does the game have enough to stand out and keep players around and steal them away from PUBG or Fortnite and the upcoming AAA BR contenders? I'm not so sure. I think Islands of Nine needs something more. And that's all for today, guys. If you've played this game, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, give me a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.